think is the number one, if there's one or two mistakes that you see leaders make on a consistent basis, what do you think that would be? What would they be?
That is a really good question. I think a couple of the mistakes folks make as leaders, it's easy to get complacent. I think it's easy to make assumptions. Of course, everybody likes what I'm doing. Of course, everybody's, on board. Of course they are. Well, they're on board because you're standing in between them and their paycheck sometimes, and I think Marshall Goldsmith had a really great example, and I love him. I love his work. I love his books. And he mentioned he'd spoken to an Admiral, I believe it was, that he was doing some executive coaching for, and had mentioned, the Admiral had mentioned that, you like to try to ask, get some opinions from his junior officers, stuff like that. And it's like, if you make a comment, it's an order. If you make a suggestion, it's an order. If you give it it's an order. They're not, it's hard to have that honest, you have to really set the stage to have that honest dialogue and conversation to really get, genuine input.
Hey everyone, John Fenton here, the CEO Sensei, and I am so honored and pleased to have as my guest today, Dr. David Miles. He's a PhD in organizational development. David, welcome.
Hey, glad to be here, John. Thank you.
Awesome. And Dave's the founder of Dr. Dave Leadership Corporation, focusing on culture, leadership, communication, engagement, and a whole lot of really cool stuff. And I'm really just happy to have you on board today.
Oh, happy to be here. It's I really enjoyed our conversation before pre-recording, and I know we've had several before, so it's nice to be here and be able to just continue the conversation. That's for sure.
So, Dave, tell everybody who's watching and listening a little bit about your business, the Dr. Dave Leadership Corporation.
I had to laugh because I'm like, well, if leadership is kind of my specialty, and as like you said, that's why I'm PhDs in that, is organizational leadership and human resource development. So I was like, well, obviously it has to have it in the name, but my focus, I really enjoy working with senior leadership teams, boards, that type of top level leadership to really get started, because I've found so many organizations where no matter what is on the wall, vision, mission, values, whatever, most of the time it ends up being, unfortunately, just platitudes on a wall, a plaque that people walk by in the hallway every day. Maybe come to it every 3 years to dust it off and redo it, but do they live it? And that's the biggest part. There's so many silos in a lot of organizations, and you have marketing against sales and sales against marketing, and of course everybody hates human resources, Right. And then operations is trying to do its own thing, and yeah, I'm not worried about them. Just keep selling the product, and they're trying to deliver the orders. Like, would they quit selling because we can't deliver fast enough? And so everybody's siloed up. And I think being able to take that top tier of leadership and to start with and really help them understand each other, not just from a departmental level, but really from a people level, behaviors, what drives folks, what they're good at, and really be able to understand them and realize where they're coming from. I like to call it appreciating the differences of the people on your team, not just tolerating, because trust me, I've been in there before. We tolerate a lot of people, just kind of, that's just Joe, grin and bear it. But getting them to really appreciate the folks that are on that senior leadership team, the diverse opinion where they come from, why they do what they do, and understand it, I think it really helps bridge that gap, improve communication, and ultimately take all the warm fuzzy aside. You're going to get things done quicker, improve productivity, improve engagement, and just great place to start, because all that true change has to come from the top. It's not a political campaign. It doesn't groundswell from the bottom up.
I'm a firm believer in that, Dave. And as I like to say, everything flows from you as the leader. So definitely leadership from the top and walking the talk. Someone said, oh, it's a 1980s term. Sorry, I'm dating myself, but it's important, right? And so what is tell us, listeners and people watching, like, what's the number one issue you see today, right now?
Right now, it's really interesting because it's as of the recording, it's, the June, July timeframe, 2021. And a lot of states have been reopening and a lot of people are coming back. and the new CDC guidelines, and a lot of states are still in this kind of weird middle ground. Like, okay, well, the customers coming in, if you're a retail forward-facing establishment, the customers are coming in, and obviously CDC guidelines are saying if you vaccinated, you don't have to wear a mask. But our occupational safety and health standards for our state have not changed, so our employees still have to. So it's kind of in that weird middle ground, and I call it almost like a reboarding process. You've had so many people that have been out working remotely, and even if it's not full time, they're starting to come back in a day or two a week, 2-3 days a week. They're starting to kind of make that transition. And I've noticed also some folks that they've noticed on their teams when they work together for a long time in person, then they had the pandemic, they've already built the relationship. So, being on Zoom like we are now, not a big deal. We all know where everybody's coming from because we've built those relationships. We've seen the body language. We know the nuances. Then you bring new people on the team. I only know you from Zoom now. I don't have that bond and that relationship. So it's a weird dynamic. So, and I call it reboarding. We're kind of in this reboarding process, I think, in 2021 on how do we kind of get back and just really not back to what it was. A real good friend of mine who's a PhD, and he does a lot of leadership training. And I love his perspective on what do you want to go back when we could take what we've learned and try to go forward and improve and be even better. And not and just take the good of what we've done with working remotely or some of the processes that are in place that make things more efficient, but then rebuild on that and with people coming back into the workforce. But there's a real awkwardness, I think, with this reboarding, and so really being able to kind of tap into that engagement piece and figure out where people are is super important.
I think you're right on, and it's interesting. You mentioned not kind of learning from this past 18 months or so, right? And how can we make our businesses better? I'm a big believer in that, and looking forward and taking that and making your company organization much better and really learning from that. And really being agile, but also you've probably heard the term antifragile. I know I did a talk about that recently, right? About just it's even more than being resilient, right? It's about being able to thrive and to learn and to grow from that experience.
Absolutely. Well, and I love the book about it too that you had mentioned, but also and if you've ever watched any of Tom Bilyeu's interviews online, he was with Quest for a number of years and he has his own kind of thing now. But I tell you what, he does a great job explaining that whole anti-fragile concept, and he's interviewed the guy who's written the books or whatever. So I've gone back. That's where I first learned about the concept, was through him and his interview and the unique perspective that he puts on it. But you're absolutely right. I think if anybody came out of 2020 into 2021, whether it's a business, an association, an organization, a practice, and you're still standing, you haven't turned in your charter, you haven't, you still got a couple members left, if you're still doing business, you're still up and running, just chalk one up in the W category. Right? Even no matter how bad of a beating you took, if you're still alive, you're still going, you're still able to progress and do business. Yeah, chalk one up for the win. It might have been an ugly win. And I'm sure when you played football, you've had some ugly wins, but it still counted as one in the W category, didn't it?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Take the win for the win, learn from it, and watch the films and go back and do better next time. But thankful for the win.
There were some ugly film sessions in the day. I can promise you that, my friend.
No doubt in my mind. Absolutely. And I think if we had the film of 2020, the first part of 2021, man, some of us, it'd be rough. But, if you made it through on the other end, because so many businesses didn't, then, like I said, chalk it up in the win category, some degree of resilience and anti-fragileness, and then just keep on, learn from it, hard charge from it, take the best that you can apply and keep going.
Tell me, we've not talked about this before, so I'm curious to get your take on this, but tell me, what do you think is the number one, if there's one or two mistakes that you see leaders make on a consistent basis, what do you think that would be? What would they be?
That is a really good question. I think a couple of the mistakes folks make as leaders, it's easy to get complacent. I think it's easy to make assumptions. Of course, everybody likes what I'm doing. Of course, everybody's, on board. Of course they are. Well, they're on board because you're standing in between them and their paycheck sometimes, And I think Marshall Goldsmith had a really great example, and I love him. I love his work. I love his books. And he mentioned he'd spoken to an admiral, I believe it was, that he was doing some executive coaching for, and had mentioned the admiral had mentioned that you like to try to ask, get some opinions from his junior officers, stuff like that. And it's like, if you make a comment, it's an order. If you make a suggestion, it's an order. If you give it it's an order. They're not. It's hard to have that honest. You have to really set the stage to have that honest dialogue and conversation to really get genuine input and opinions, even if they're not and you have to. I think you have to really have it in a. I hate to use the word safe arena, but safe space kind of thing. But you have to create an environment that allows people to give those dissenting opinions and stuff that you might not want to hear, because this might be exactly what you need to hear. And even if it's not from the guy you want to hear it from, or the gal you want to hear it from, you're like, I don't like Joe. I don't like Joe. Ah, God, he gets on my nerves. But it may be exactly the thing you need to hear to tighten up. He's shooting holes in the process, right? He's showing you where the weaknesses are that you might not be able to see on your own. And I think that being able to authentically take it for what it's worth, put it into practice, and go with it, I think is a big one. I think
that's so true. And I think you're right on. I mean, it's hard as the leader. No one wants to tell the emperor he has no clothes, right?
Right. So, yeah. Not a fun place to be.
and that's a great analogy. I mean, a couple of great analogies. One, I love the game film analogy. I'll have to use that myself, but the analogy around, in the military, giving orders and that sort of thing. And you've got to build that environment, right? You're talking about the admirals, but building an environment where it's safe to speak your opinion. And so there's been I've been reading some articles the last few years around building psychological safety.
Yes.
Into the organization, right? And enabling people to speak up.
Yes. And I believe it was one gentleman I was talking about, when he facilitates, he'll hand out these little, he calls them elephant cards. You don't have to interrupt. You don't have to say anything. And whoever's speaking doesn't even have to acknowledge it. But if it's something that is the 800-pound gorilla of the room, or the elephant in the room, somebody can just literally hold up that card, and just hold it up. And they might put it in the parking lot. They may put it on the table. But it's something where it's, look, we all know there's a problem here. And I'm just kind of, doing my part. I don't have to be overly aggressive. I don't have to be, but I'm just holding up my little elephant card saying, hey, I think there's something we might want to be addressing with this.
That is a great technique. It's interesting, as you were saying that, I remember I was leading a workshop with some senior executives, and we had a break. I didn't have any cards or anything.
Yeah.
We had a break, and one of the senior execs handed me a little note on a little sticky note that said, this is what the problem is, So it was her version of a elephant card. So.
Yep. And sometimes that's a great question to ask, whether you're coming in to do a keynote, or you're coming in to do a facilitation, or you're doing any kind of workshop or work with them. What are some of if you can get them? Sometimes it's easier than others, I'm not going to lie. Mm-hmm. But if you can get from not just the person bringing you in, but if you can interview or talk to a few of the people in the crowd, in the workshop, in the leadership team before you start, what are some of the issues? What might be some of the things going on, background info, elephants in the room? Definitely from the CEO that's bringing you in, or the board that is bringing you in, if you can. But I think the more impact you can get, and the more you can get from the other folks that are there too, it can really help. Because it's embarrassing. I'll be honest with you. I've done it myself. It's embarrassing to step in that pile of, when it's like, ooh, nobody told me that this just happened, or that just happened, or they're bringing me in because they just fired a guy or fired a gal for XYZ, and that's what we're talking about now, and I had no idea. That'd have been nice to know 10 minutes ago.
Right. And it's all about trust, isn't it, really?
It is, because and that's one of the things I like about breaking down some of those barriers to communication between the senior leaders, because they're the really ones setting their tone for their divisions, for their departments, for their part of the organization that they're responsible for. And if you don't trust the other departments, because in the organization, if you don't trust the people that are below you or the people that are above you, your colleagues, you're only going to have a certain level of success, I believe. You just can't be all in, put all the chips on the table, and really do everything you need to do to be as successful as you need to be if you don't have that psychological safety built, if you don't have that trust built up, and you can't have that honest dialogue, even if it's in a very structured environment. Okay, once a week, once a month, as soon as that door shuts, all right, phone's in the basket, or whatever, just, okay, it's, off the record, it's on, and we're going to have honest dialogue and conversation, and we're going to walk out, disagree all we want, walk out of here as friends, but we're walking out of here with one train of thought, but that takes trust, like I said, and understanding people and understanding where they're coming from. And I think there's a lot to be said. However you do it is trying to get these leaders to understand and change that mindset of that automatic assumption of ill intent to that. Let me give them the benefit of the doubt and have my underlying default be good intent. Something came across bad. Okay, well, John, I know John probably didn't mean it that way. It just came across as, I'll talk to him later about that, versus I can't believe John said that. What nerve he has. And then how that god awful spiral ends up.
Yeah. So I know that part of your work includes human potential and assessments. Tell us more about that.
Well, I'll honestly be one of my favorites, just because of having that data-driven type of thing. We have a lot of systems and processes, and there's a lot of things you can get so deep into weeds with Six Sigma and a lot of the analytic parts of looking at different processes, and you need to. But when it comes to people aren't sometimes quite that simple. It's hard to Six Sigma a whole lot of people, right? It's just, to get it down when there's that variation, but being able to kind of get some really good, hardcore, valid, reliable, scientific data on, behavioral analysis, on communication traits, on things that drive and motivate people, their soft skill competencies, their capacity to be able to perform work, how they view the world, their systems judgment, stuff like that, depending how the purpose you're using it for and how deep it is. I love that, because you have something for the individual themselves to really grow and develop and become more self-aware. And I think as leaders, if we're not self-aware, it severely limits our growth. But a lot of times to be able to aggregate that data and figure out, based on different behavioral traits and different things, wow, where are we as a team? Where's our group at? Where are some of our best traits and some of our best attributes, and where are we really lacking? I mean, if you're doing something with a team and you realize that, hey, guess what? Sense of urgency and competitiveness are the bottom of our 12 behavioral traits, and you're wondering, why aren't we getting anything done? You got a pretty complacent team right there. And you wonder why we get really irritated with Mike, because Mike is always the one, come on guys, come on guys, come on guys. And you see Mike's sense of urgency is through the roof, and everybody else is like, leave it 5, check clears every 2 weeks, man, I'm good. So you can see where it really that data pulls out, without having to have 10 years of working with somebody experience, where there's potential issues for conflict, where there's real points where there's real conflict going at. So that being able to do that, I think works. I like working with that so much better than just, I think, I believe, I assume, I hope, because that way you can point to, well, this is what we have on the data. And this is what, something that's reliable, that's valid, that's, we can point back to and be able to work from, and kind of get a general idea of the people in the right. And not personality. It's not, anything like that. We're not clinical psychologists. So it's right. Not getting into the kind of the psychotherapy end of it, but really, what makes people tick, how they do what they do. I guess is a big one, why they do what they do, the stuff kind of below the surface, some of their, their soft skill competencies, their capacity to do work, what they've been really good at and they've developed over the years. Just having that type of people analytic data, along with some other ones, and to be able to build on that, I think makes a much stronger foundation when you're trying to work with teams than just training and assumptions.
And the assessment tool, I think it's called TTI.
Yeah, TTI Success Insights is where I get a lot of my assessment tools from.
Mhm.
There are some organizational assessments and some specific leadership 360s that I get from some other places that I
Mhm.
used in my research.
Right.
But yes, I get most of the assessment packages through them, mainly it's honestly because of the research team. When I went and visited them before I chose them as a vendor, one, I was impressed with the suite that they had. For example, even with emotional intelligence, really zoning in on Daniel Goleman's model for their research and what they use versus, and I like Baron's model, don't get me wrong, but I mean, you got two kind of competing models for emotional intelligence. I've just always been such a fan of Goleman
Mhm.
that, being able to use that process based on Daniel Goleman's model, but seeing the tremendous amount of statistical analysis that went into it, seeing the brain research and peer-reviewed studies that they've been able to do with, EEG, brain associations for different words and different things. I was very impressed with the amount of time, money, and energy and resources they've invested into research that I don't think you always get. I don't think you get everywhere. A lot of assessments are great for what they are, and they're very useful tools, but I like having something that as a research-based PhD, I can hang my hat on and say, this is solid, and be able to walk into a CEO's office or a boardroom with confidence and say, hey, this data is on point.
Good. Good deal. So just a couple of final questions for you to kind of wrap up today. And I haven't asked you this question before. So
This ought to be good.
So yeah, it's obvious to me you're very passionate about your work and what you do. And I love to ask this question of business leaders and entrepreneurs and founders and CEOs. So is there a moment in your life, what I call defining moments, where you were challenged with something in your life and it became a pivotal moment in your life that helped set you up for future success in your life? Is there anything like that you want to share?
I think there is, in a little bit more of an indirect way, but yes,
Okay.
I think there's something in some of my speeches, I talk about that it's all the fault of a chicken sandwich. And people, of course, I'll show a picture of a chicken sandwich on there, and they're looking at me like I have literally lost my mind. And I'm not disputing that. I may have, right? So I'm not disputing their expert clinical analysis, right? I may have absolutely lost my mind, but I jokingly blame it on a chicken sandwich because when I first started working, and I think it came into play years later when I really didn't realize it, but I think this was one of the kind of pivotal areas. It was, I started, beyond cutting grass and doing odd jobs, my first real job, went down to the city and got a work permit before I was 16 to go work at Chick-fil-A in the mall. And same thing, dating myself from the 80s, this was way before the cows and everything was brown and they were only in the malls, right? So, so with that, it was fast food. It was in the mall at Christmas. I mean, you're busier than what trying to do. So it's not like it's great work with great money and whatever. But it's what I liked about it was the fact that the guy who owned it, and I think that was important that every store had somebody that actually owned that store. I like the fact that he built a culture there that was really second to none. And I was too dumb to realize it at the time. I just thought, I mean, if you're somewhere for 3 years and you're 18 years old, that's a pretty significant, by that time, that's a significant percentage of your life, even though you and I look now like 3 years is nothing. But at the time, that was a pretty large percentage-wise chunk of your born days on this earth. And so when you work for an owner and all his managers and supervisors create that environment that you want to go to work, family atmosphere, whatever, and you just enjoyed being there and very appreciative of the employees and high level of engagement. And you leave and you go somewhere else. And those are your formative years of work because you're stupid at that age. You're like, well, that's what work is because that's what I've spent a large percentage of my life on. And you go somewhere else and it's not like that. You're like, but wait a minute, why isn't this like that? It could be. And they're like, no, son, life's not like that. And like, well, no, yes, it is. I just left it. Like the last 3 years, like, no, boy, you don't understand. That's it, the world, that world doesn't exist. I'm like, it does. I just left it. And so I think that cognitive dissonance between, I know what it could be. And nowhere is perfect, right? No boss is perfect. No leader is perfect. None of us are. But to be very intentional and to be very deliberate in the way he created a culture at that that little microcosm of a team, that store, and seeing other teams, good bosses, bad bosses, whatever, and to see the differences, I think that really set up that nagging cognitive dissonance. And okay, I know it could be like this, and it is in certain organizations, and there's no reason you can't learn as much about that as possible, which is one of the reasons I went back to school, to try to get the tools and and learn as much about what could we do to create that elsewhere, because you see the productivity, you see the profits, you see the efficiencies, you see the engagement that comes from it. And you see all the research now talking about, very high correlation between, high levels of employee engagement and productivity, and reduced turnover and stuff like that. And that's real bottom line dollars for an organization. It really is. And so I think that was one of the pivotal moments that really kind of just that nagged in my head through all these years. Like, how can I put a Band-Aid on this? How can I try to, fix this issue, even not for everybody, but at least learn as much about it as possible, and have, be able to have some tools that can really make a difference and help leaders and teams and organizations.
That's a great example, the Chick-fil-A example of how to handle customer service and how to handle your employees and deal with your employees and their mission. And it's really a great example. There's other examples too out there, but that's a great one, Chick-fil-A. And I thank you for sharing. I really appreciate that.
Oh, no problem.
How can people watching or listening reach you or connect with you? What's the best way?
I think LinkedIn is, I pretty much live on LinkedIn. So you can always go to my LinkedIn profile. You can just search David Miles on there, and you'll be able to find it. You can also go to my website. It's just drdavemiles.com. It's just, DRDAVEMILES, drdavemiles.com. That's probably the two best ways. I'm on Twitter, I'm on Facebook, I have presence in a lot of places, but I think the two, my website and my LinkedIn profile are the biggest ones. So, and you mentioned about that, there's if people are interested, since we've talked a little bit about reboarding, I've got a PDF, a free PDF on my website that's talks a little bit about that whole reboarding and engagement process for people coming back in there. So they're more than welcome to go there and download that. I think it's a useful tool.
Yeah, I did download it. It was really insightful, and I appreciate they have a couple of tools there, and the reboarding and that. And so it's really good information. And thank you for sharing that.
Oh, no problem. No problem.
All right, Dr. Dave Miles, I'm so happy to have you with me today in this conversation. There's a lot of great insights, and I love your energy. Reach out to Dr. Dave. You can find him on LinkedIn, Dave Miles. You can also find him on his website, drdavemiles.com. And I'll put all that information in the show notes. You can also check that out as well. And again, David, thank you so much.
Oh, thank you, John. Glad to be here.